Okay, so today we'll try and get through Unit 2 and 3 of AP Micro, and that'll be the halfway point of this AP subject. Unit 2 is over supply and demand. Okay, so topic 2.1 is demand. So before we get into this, I will mention this real quick. Uh, those of you who come from like science probably are familiar with your independent variable being on your x-axis and your dependent variable being on your y-axis. But in economics, it's the opposite, where price is on the y-axis, even though it's an independent variable, and quantity is on the x-axis, despite it being the dependent variable. So markets and property rights. A market where multiple parties exchange things of value uh, is a market. Examples range from like the stock market all the way to grocery stores like H-E-B and Walmart. Property rights must exist for markets to exist, and property rights need to have three things. They need to be exclusive. So if someone owns something, they own it, no one else owns it. They have to be enforceable. So if someone tries to mess with someone else's property rights, there will be something that will enforce the property rights. And then third, it's transferable, so people can buy things on an open market. Okay, the law of demand. The law of demand is the inverse relationship between price and quantity, which makes our demand curve negative sloped whenever we graph it. So, law of demand states that if we increase the price, then quantity demanded will decrease. Inverse relationship. So if we decrease the price, quantity demanded will increase. So we can make a demand schedule, which is just a relationship between price and quantity, uh, and it's a relationship between price and quantity demanded in a table. So if we have scenario A where the price is $2, quantity demanded may be 60,000. Scenario B, $4, 40,000, $6, 30,000, $8, 25,000, $10, 23,000. And when we look at the graph, you can see it here. Um, whenever it's cheaper in uh, scenario A, there's more people willing to buy it. In scenario B, whenever it is slightly more expensive, then we have less people. Quantity C, less people. Quantity D, less people. Quantity E, less people. It's a relationship between price and quantity demanded. Something I want to note real quick, the difference between quantity demanded and demand. So quantity demanded is the number that people would be willing to buy at a given price. So this would be the point, the individual point on the line. So whenever we talk about changes in quantity demanded, it'll be like a change in price. So a change of price will change in quantity demanded. While demand is the relationship between price and the quantity demanded. So uh, later on, we'll see uh, what can change demand, but it's not price. And so demand is the whole line. You can make demand schedules with the information for marginal utility that we learned in Unit 1, but I don't think AP will ask about it. Um, but I'll show it to you all anyways. So let's say this person has $5. You can see at $1 they'll have certain behaviors where they'll buy 3 bars of chocolate because they get more utility uh, than fruit whenever it was $1. But whenever you raise the price, then fruit becomes more desirable because people get more utility out of it. So you can see the quantity demanded drop down from 3 to 1. Um, to make up a market's demand curve, like the whole market, you add up all the individuals' demand curves. So you can see that this is person A, person B, and we add them together and we get the market's demand curve. So why do people consume more as price decreases even though there is diminishing marginal utility? Um, as we talked about, uh, what was it? I think we talked about in Unit 1, diminishing marginal utility, where the more that someone has of something, the less useful it is. Well, the answer is the substitution effect. So people will substitute a similar good for a good that is cheaper because their marginal utility is greater per dollar now compared to that previously consumed good. So I don't know what example to use, but yeah, people will substitute two similar goods. Oh, I have a good example. Do I? Never mind. I don't really. Uh, but I challenge y'all to think of your own example of the substitution effect. The income effect is another reason why people consume more as price decreases. People now have more money to spend on stuff once they buy that cheaper good that they can now use elsewhere. So if you were spending, I don't know, maybe $500 a month on, no, I don't like that example. Let's say you're spending $40 a week on gasoline and gasoline gets cheaper. So now your gasoline gets cheaper and now you're only spending $30 a week on gas. So now you have 10 extra dollars that you could be spending elsewhere. And some of that may go towards gas and some of it may not, but that's the income effect. So there are the shifts in demand curve. Um, there's there's five. Your related goods, your expectations, income, population or number of buyers, and preferences. I have the acronym PREPI, but I think Mr. D has his own one, own acronym. So whatever you use to remember it. But there's two types of related goods. There's substitutes and complements. So substitutes are goods that people switch over um, between goods. So um, maybe barbecue sauce and ketchup, right? They would be substitutes. Um, you have chicken nuggets, you can dip your chicken nuggets in both. So if all of a sudden the price of ketchup increases, what happens to your demand of barbecue sauce? Well, you buy more barbecue sauce, so your demand increases for barbecue sauce. So that's how substitutes work. If the price of a substitute increases, then the demand of the original good increases. Yeah, so if ketchup gets more expensive, then you buy more barbecue sauce. If the price of a substitute decreases, then your demand decreases. So the demand of the original good decreases. So um, if ketchup becomes cheaper, then you're gonna stop buying barbecue sauce and buy ketchup. So price of ketchup goes down, demand for barbecue sauce goes down. So substitutes they follow each other. It's the same relationship. Examples of substitutes would be like hamburgers, hot dogs, Coke, and Pepsi, etc. Complements. Complements are goods that are usually bought together. So if the price of a complement, the price of a complement increases, then the demand for its paired good decreases. So I'll use peanut butter and jelly, right? So if the price of peanut butter goes up, then you're going to be making less peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So then you start buying less jelly, even though the price of jelly didn't change. So the relationship's opposite. So if the price of a complement increases, then the demand decreases. And then the opposite's true. So if the price of a complement decreases, then your demand will increase. So if peanut butter becomes cheaper, then you're going to start buying more jelly because you may be making more peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. All right. The next one, that's related goods. The two types of related goods. All right. Expectations. So expectations is what people think is going to happen. So if people think that the price is going to increase, then the demand increases. So they get the cheaper deal today. So you see it with sales, right? So if like a store advertises that they have a sale and it ends at the end of April, right? People now are going to buy more stuff to take advantage of the sale because they think their price is going to increase later. So their demand increases now. If people think the price is going to decrease, then the demand decreases. So if you speculate that your favorite store is going to have a sale, like a summer sale, and it's April, then your demand now for whatever that good is going to decrease because you're anticipating that sale and you're expecting a cheaper price in the future, so your demand decreases now. Okay. So, yeah, that's expectations. Next is income. There's income's repeated twice because income has different relationships to different types of goods, normal goods and inferior goods. Um, like inferior goods are kind of like substitutes for normal goods, but they're worse in some way. So I'll talk about normal goods first, and then I'll talk about inferior goods. So if someone's income increases, then their demand's going to increase, right? So they have more money to spend, and now they're going to buy more stuff. So their demand increases. If someone's income decreases, then their demand. Hmm? Oh wait, I mean the wrong one. If people's demand or if people's income decreases, then their demand's going to decrease for normal goods, right? Because they have less money to spend, and now they're going to buy less stuff, right? Um, yeah. I can't really explain like define what a normal good is without explaining what an inferior good is. So I'll mention the relationship with inferior goods next. So with income, if someone's income increases for an inferior good, their demand is going to decrease, right? So an inferior good would be like a bus ticket, right? Like if someone had more money, then maybe they would buy a car or they would prefer to drive a car rather than take a bus. Sorry, Steven. Um, but so that would make the bus ticket an inferior good because if someone had more money, they would stop consuming the bus ticket and they would consume something else. So if someone lost income, so if someone's income decreases for an inferior good, or yeah, someone's income decreases, then their demand for an inferior good is going to increase. So if someone loses their job and they anticipate that they won't get another job for a while, they may sell their car and start taking the bus places to save money. All right, the next one's kind of intuitive, but its population is another change, like shifter of demand. So as the population increases, then demand increases. So the more people there are, the more people buy stuff because there's more people buying stuff. As population decreases, then demand decreases because there's more people, or if there's less people, then less people want to buy stuff because there's less people to buy stuff. All right, the next is preferences, or the last one's preferences. As the consumers prefer a good more, then demand increases. So I think an example of this would be like fashion, right? Fashion is like rotates and it's not always the same. So maybe people wouldn't really, or the demand for stuff that was fashionable maybe 20 years ago isn't really in demand now. So as something becomes more popular or it's more preferred by the public, then its demand will increase. And as those consumers lose preference in that good, then the demand decreases. Yeah, I know this is like a lot, but you're just gonna have to learn all these relationships. Uh, Preppy is how I remember um, the five indicators, and then you can kind of think out the relationships. All right, next is supply. So law of supply. Law of supply is a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. So this makes it positive sloping because as the price increases, the quantity supplied of a good increases. And as the price decreases, then the quantity supplied decreases. So quantity supplied and supply are similar to like quantity demanded and demand and how that they're different. So quantity supplied is a number that people would be willing to sell at a given price, so the point on the line, while supply is the relationship between price and quantity, so it's the whole line, the whole relationship. So here's an example. At $1, at $1, people would only be willing to supply 1,000 pounds of grapes. But if the price was $2 per pound of grape, then maybe farmers would be willing to uh, sell 2,000 pounds. And then once it's $3, 2,500 uh, pounds because maybe they'll start farming land that wasn't profitable to farm before because now it's profitable and they can now make a profit off of it as they're making more per pound. Okay. Shifts in the supply curve. Tyner. The first one I'll talk about is input price. So for people to supply things, they usually have to have inputs. So as the price increases for an input, then supply decreases. So let's say you're making tires, right? And rubber becomes more expensive, then you're going to decrease your production of tires because it's not as profitable to make more tires because it's now more expensive to make them. So you're going to cut down supply. But as input prices decrease, then the supply increases. So if that rubber became cheaper, then maybe you can afford to make tires and run into margins that used to be unprofitable before to now make a profit. Next is related goods. Other stuff. Sorry, it's just a little obscure because it's usually associated with demand. Okay, so this is talking about substitutes, specifically substitutes that consumers can make. So a productive substitute may be like ice cream and frozen yogurt, where they have such similar inputs where someone that makes ice cream could switch to frozen yogurt if it became more popular or more profitable. Not popular, profitable. So as the price of a substitute increases, then the supply decreases. So if froyo became more expensive, then the supply of ice cream will decrease. But because the people that are making ice cream are going to switch over to froyo. As the price of a substitute decreases, then supply increases. So as the price of froyo decreases, the supply of as the price of froyo decreases, then the supply of ice cream will increase because now those froyo, the people that sell froyo are no longer making a profit, so they're now switching to ice cream. Our next is numbers of suppliers. So as the number of suppliers increase, then supply increases because there's now more people to make stuff. So the more people making stuff, the more stuff there is. As the number of supplier decreases, then the supply decreases. The less people there is to make stuff, then the less stuff there is. Next is technology. Technology is one of those that's only really one way because the inverse never really happens. So as technology improves, the supply increases. So if we think of like maybe steel, right? Prior to the Bessemer process, the supply of steel was much lower. And then Bessemer made his process that could make steel quicker, then the supply of steel increases. So the more technology there is, the more supply. The inverse still applies. Like if somehow we lost technology, supply would decrease, but it's extremely unlikely because there's very few times in human history where we lost technology, maybe besides like the Dark Ages. All right, next is expectations. So as the expected price increases, then the current supply decreases. So if a firm expects that they can sell something at a higher price later, then they will sell less now to conserve supply to sell it later. So I don't know if you sell oil, right? And you expect the price of oil to go up, then you'll cut your supply now so you can sell more oil whenever it's more expensive. And the inverse applies. So as the expected price decreases, then current supply increases. So if you expect oil prices to go down, then you may sell off all your oil now to get it at that higher price. I probably should have mentioned this, but an increase in like supply and demand would look something like this. Like if supply increases, then the curve moves, right? And the same thing with demand. If you have demand and demand increases, then you draw the demand like that. But if your supply decreased, you draw it like that. And if demand decreased, you draw it like that. Yeah, probably should have mentioned that. But yeah. Oh, how you can remember what's like how they slope? Um, when you draw a supply points to the sky. But when you draw demand, demand points to the dirt. All right, next is elasticity. So elasticity measures how quantity responds to price. So it's a percent change in quantity over a percent change in price, and that gives you your elasticity coefficient. It's the exact opposite of slope. It's change of x over change of y. So that's how I remember it. I go from slope and then work my way back. I go from change of x over change of y. Oh no, I go from change of x to change of y to percent change in quantity, which is the x-axis, and the percent change in price. That gives me the elasticity coefficient. So if your elasticity coefficient is greater than 1, then it's going to be elastic, and if it's less than 1, it's inelastic. Well, what does that mean? Well, elastic means that your quantity is going to be responsive to your price. So if you changed your price, like let's say you're a seller and you change your price, then people are going to buy more, or people are going to buy. Let me rephrase that. If you lower your price and it's elastic, then people are going to buy more than that loss of revenue. But if your good is inelastic and you raise the price, then your revenue is going to increase because quantity is relatively unresponsive to price. So you won't lose that much quantity in response to price, or in response to an increase in price. You can have perfectly elastic, or wow, it's a lot to unpack. Sorry, I am scatterbrained. There's 5 like categories, or yeah, 5 categories of elasticity. There's perfectly elastic. That means that all quantity will respond to a change in price. So if your good is perfectly elastic and you increase the price, literally everyone will stop buying. And your elasticity coefficient is infinite. I'm wondering if you get that definition like with from this with a 0 on the bottom and a number over the top, because that, like the limit of that, even though that's undefined, the limit of that approaches infinity, but that's more of a calculus thing, and I'm just curious if that's how you get that equation, but this is pretty rare. And I'll talk about in a second what determines whether something's elastic or inelastic. Next is elastic, where your coefficient is greater than 1. Your quantity will respond to your price. And so that means lowering price on an elastic good means increasing revenue. Next is unit elastic or unitary elastic, and that's where your elasticity coefficient equals exactly 1. And that's a 1-to-1 relationship between quantity and price. So if you um, raise the price 10%, then quantity will decrease 10%. So changing the price on a unitary elastic good will have no effect on revenue. Next is inelastic, and the coefficient is less than 1. And that means quantity is relatively unresponsive to price. And that means that raising the price increases revenue. So like someone could increase the price and not that many people would stop buying. Next is perfectly inelastic, where the coefficient equals 0. And that means that quantity is completely unresponsive to price. So people will buy this amount no matter what the price is. On the graph, it'll look something like that, like an eye, inelastic. Because no matter what the price is, the quantity is always the same. Okay. What I just talked about was price elasticity, and there's price elasticity of supply and price elasticity of demand. This concept, like this part of the concept, stays the same. this part about revenue doesn't. The part about revenue is only for price elasticity of demand, but this part applies to both. It's the same formula, change in percent change in quantity over percent change in price is the same formula for price elasticity of demand and price elasticity of supply. There are 4 factors that influence the price elasticity of demand. One is substitutes. So the more substitutes something is, then the more elastic the demand will be, because consumers have an easier time switching to an alternative. So yeah, I don't have an example for that. The next thing that influences price elasticity of demand is necessities, or how necessary the good is. So the more that a good is necessary or a priority to a consumer, the more inelastic it will be, because consumers are willing to pay no matter the price. So if you think of insulin, right? The thing that people with diabetes need, then that's inelastic, because they can't live, or they can't live, or their quality of life would be lower without insulin to such a great proportion that there's such a high value of that good, or they place such a high value on that good because they require it, and there's nothing that can replace it. So it's inelastic because it's a necessity, and it's inelastic because there's nothing that can replace it. Oh yeah, there's an example. Okay. Next is market definition. So the broader the market is, the more inelastic it is, because there are fewer substitutes that a consumer could switch to. So a beverage is like, the demand for beverages is more inelastic than the demand for Coke, because the demand for beverages, well, everyone has to drink, so it's a necessity, and there's no substitute for drinking something. Everyone needs to drink something. But Coke is the broader the more. Oh yeah, okay. Coke is more specific. So you could switch to Pepsi, or you could switch to water, or you could switch to a lot of things. So that makes it more elastic compared to its broader counterpart. And elasticity is kind of like a spectrum. Like, something could be inelastic, but there's stuff more inelastic to it. So like, uh, to get back on this market definition, right? Gasoline is inelastic, but energy is more inelastic, because our society needs energy. We can switch from gasoline to something else, a different form of energy. But because energy is a more broad definition, it's more inelastic. Next is time horizon. So the more time that there is for consumers to adapt, the more elastic the demand, because it gives the consumers more time to adapt and change their behavior. So the definition of elasticity is to measure how quantity responds to price. Well, if consumers knew that price of gasoline was going to go up in a year, they'll start changing their behavior now, and that quantity will respond to that price because they have time to change for it. But if the price of gasoline just changes like tomorrow, no one can go out and buy a more fuel efficient car, or a electric car, or all of a sudden change their lifestyle to start biking to school, or carpooling, or taking the bus. It's a bit harder to change your behavior in a shorter time horizon. So those influence price elasticity of demand. And this is what the graphs look like for each of the 5. So perfectly inelastic, the line is straight. It looks like an eye. Inelastic, it's steep downward sloping. For unitary elastic, you can see that there's like this 1-to-1 ratio, right? That, like, here you can see that price and supply, or price and quantity, are about the same. Elastic is a bit flatter, less steep of a demand curve. you can see that if we decreased price from here to like, from here to like here, a whole lot of quantity increases. Next is perfectly elastic, where it's a flat line. Another thing about market definition, another example I can think of would be like pink tennis balls, right? That's super specific, right? So the demand for pink tennis balls is probably going to be perfectly elastic because all the different colors of tennis balls are substitutes. Um, yeah, and it's just such a specific good, where a less specific good, a more broad good, would be more inelastic. Next are the three factors that influence the price elasticity of supply. So the first one is ease of entry or exit from the market. So the easier it is for people to enter or exit the market, the more elastic their supply is, because new people can join production easily or leave easily if prices went down. This is going to make more sense when I cover Unit 3 later in the stream, because you'll see how entering and exiting the market affects firms when we look at perfectly competitive markets. But like for now, think about it like this. Uh, if all of a sudden it became profitable to make tires, right? Tires is a pretty hard business to get into. I mean, I don't know the whole process, but that's probably one of the reasons why it's a hard business to get into. So it's so the amount that the supply is going to change in response to price isn't that much, because not that many people can all of a sudden enter the market. Next is scarcity of inputs. So the scarcer the input is, the scarcer the inputs are, the more inelastic, because products cannot easily be made. The more of that good of the price. Wow, I worded that really bad. Easily make more. Because producers cannot easily make more of that good if prices went up. So think of like land, or like real estate. Uh, the supply of land is inelastic because there's only so much land in the world, and it's pretty hard, if not impossible, to make new land, right? So we're kind of stuck with what we got. So the inputs for that is pretty scarce. So that's why it has an inelastic supply. Next is time horizon. So the more time there is for producers to adapt to them, the more time there is for producers to adapt, the more elastic the supply, because it gives suppliers more time to adapt and change their behavior. So I'll go back to the tires, right? If I somehow knew that tires were going, if everyone knew that tires were going to become worth more, like a whole lot more, in the next 5 years, then our society, because it has 5 years to adapt, is going to learn how to make more tires and capitalize off that increase in price. So, yeah, that's a weird example. I apologize. But yeah, this is what the graph looks like of supply. So perfectly inelastic's an I. Uh, inelastic is a steep uh, upward sloping line. Unitary elastic is like 1-to-1 ratio. So we can see, like right here, it's about the same price in quantity. Elastic is a pretty flat, but not quite flat, upward sloping supply curve, and elastic is a flat. Perfectly elastic is a flat supply curve. Um, So another thing, last thing about elasticity, or price elasticity at least, is that it changes on a curve, right? So that may seem weird, but if we look right here on a unitary elastic line, we see that right here in the middle, there's like a 1-to-1 relationship, right? But let's say we go down here, right? And here is, our quantity is percent change in X, which is quantity, over change percent in price. So let's say this is like good X, right? And here it is like 2 cents. And then here it's 4 cents. Our price doubled, so that's a 100% increase in price. But our quantity didn't double. It went from like this much to like that much. I couldn't tell you the exact, but it isn't 100%, so let's say it's like 70%. Well, that is a 0.7 elasticity coefficient and therefore inelastic. But up here, let's say this is $2 and we decrease it 2 cents again. That is like it's a 1% change in price, but you are doubling quantity right here. Oh wait, I apologize. Yeah, see, you go from, let's say this was like 1,000 to like 100. Let's say this is 100 and this was like 95. The percent is 5%. Probably should have signed quantities earlier. And that's going to be what? 1 over 20, right? Yeah, so it's going to be 0.5, which that's definitely an elastic. And then here we have a 1% change, and maybe you go from 5 goods to 10 goods, and then now you have a 100% increase, and you have an elasticity coefficient of 100. So it's elastic there, but inelastic there. In the middle, it's unitary elastic. I hope that makes sense. Just elasticity changes on the supply curve. It's more inelastic on the bottom, or on a demand curve, not a supply curve. It's more inelastic on the bottom. Yeah, more inelastic on the bottom, more elastic on the top. Next, we have the other types of elasticities. So there's income elasticity of demand. So our price elasticity, I'll go from there to explain the other ones because it's how I remember the formulas. So change of x over change of y. Well, our x-axis is quantity, and our y-axis is price. So income elasticity of demand measures how quantity demanded responds to changes of income. So you go from change of quantity, or percent change in quantity of price over, sorry, keep saying things wrong. percent change of quantity over percent change in price. You substitute that price for a percent change in quantity over percent change in income. So you just change price for income. That's how I remember the formula. You can get negative here. So on the price elasticity, this is like absolute value, right? If you get a negative answer, because technically your demand's always going to be negative and your supply is going to be positive, but you treat your elasticity coefficient as an absolute value. But this one, you don't. So if you get a negative answer, then that's going to be an inferior good, negative inferior. And if you get a positive good, then that's a normal good. If it's greater than 1, then the good is going to be a luxury, a normal luxury. And if the good is less than 1, it's a necessity. The best ways to learn these is just to apply it. So I actually really like Khan Academy's questions on elasticity. It's a great way to practice. So I recommend you guys practice with Khan Academy on the elasticities. Next is cross price elasticity. So you go from your parent function, so percent change in quantity over percent change in price, to percent change. And then I'll tell you the last two after I tell you what cross price elasticity is. Cross price elasticity measures how related two goods are. So we talked about substitutes and complements, how they're related goods. This will measure exactly how related are these goods. So percent change in quantity, right? The same. Demanded, quantity demanded of good X over price of good Y. It's the same formula, just put an X and a Y on top. If your answer is positive, then the goods are substitutes. And if your answer is negative, then the goods are complements. Which may seem backwards, like conceptualizing it in our brain, we may think, oh, complements positive, duh. But you'll end up tricking yourself if you do that, because that's wrong. Negative is complements. So how I remember this is the T's and substitutes, because there's a whole lot of T's and substitutes, look like the positive sign. While complements doesn't have as many T's, so it's negative. The bigger the number is, the more that the good is either a complement or a substitute. So if you get a really big, like negative number, then it's going to be a really close complement. If you get a really small negative number, then they're going to be like kind of complements, right? Like they're sometimes brought together, but it isn't that necessarily close of a complement. Big positive number, then they're very close substitutes. Little positive number, not very close substitutes. But they're still substitutes sometimes. So that's, yeah. Next is market equilibrium. Okay, this one's short. Market equilibrium is where supply and demand intersect, and this is both a quantity and a price. So equilibrium is a quantity and a price. So remember that. I'm blanking. Oh, it's also called the market clearing price, the equilibrium. Yeah. And the equilibrium is the most efficient spot in the market. And from the graph, we can, or there's two concepts you need to understand from 2.6. And that's consumer and producer surplus. Consumer surplus is the difference between the price the consumer was willing to pay and the price that they actually paid. So on the graph, this is measured as the area below the demand curve and above equilibrium price. So right here, this triangle. Producer surplus is the difference between the price they are willing to produce at and the price that they can actually sell it at. On the graph, it is measured by the area above the supply curve and below the equilibrium price. So, as a consumer, let's say you go to the store and you're willing to buy this bag of chips for $5, right? And they sell it to you for $3, then your consumer surplus would be $2 because you're willing to spend 5 and you got it for 3. And then producer surplus would be like if the vendor was willing to sell it for $1.50 and they were able to sell it at $3 and they got $1.50 above what they were willing to sell it at. And in markets, we measure like how good a market is or how efficient it is by how much surplus there is in the market. So the more surplus, the more efficient. Total surplus is the consumer and producer surplus added together. And you can figure out consumer and producer surplus with area of a triangle on your graph, because you would just take this number, subtract it by this number, multiply it by this number, subtract it by this number, or whatever. Yeah, multiplied by your quantity. This number is subtracted by that number multiplied by your quantity divided by 2. That's your consumer surplus, 1/2 base times height. Okay, this one I'm not going to cover. Well, I'll briefly mention it. Um, but this is one that you just need to learn by practice. I um, can't really explain it to you and you get it without you practicing it. So I'll do like one example, right? So 2.7, you have to observe shifts in demand and supply and what happens in those, right? So when demand increases, what happens? Well, when people want more stuff, your quantity is going to increase and your price is, people want more stuff, price is going to go up because there's more people wanting it. So let me draw demand 1. And so an increase in demand demand 2. From here to, actually, yeah, it's on every point, it is more expensive and there's more people buying it. When we increase supply, price becomes cheaper. There's more stuff, right? So therefore price is lower. But quantity increases. So what happens to the market? Well, our verdict, quantity is definitely going to increase. But because these two conflict, we don't really know. It depends how much the supply increases, right? So let's say we increase the supply a whole lot. Actually, never mind. Never mind. Just if they conflict, then then you don't really know, because what happens if supply increases a lot more than demand increases? Well, then your price, your equilibrium price is gonna probably net go down, but you don't know it because it doesn't specify. I just said demand went up and supply went up. So since they both agreed that quantity is going up, quantity is definitely going up. But because they disagreed between price, then we don't know. So they could give you any combination of demand and supply. So maybe where demand increases, supply increases. Where demand decreases, quantity decreases, but price decreases. For supply, quantity will increase if supply increases, and price will decrease. So therefore, price will definitely decrease, and quantities we don't know. So this is just a practice thing. You have to do it over and over and over again until you understand it. Next is price controls and taxes. Okay. There are two types of price controls: price ceilings and price floors. I'll discuss price ceilings first. A price ceiling is a mandate that lowers a price below equilibrium. Price ceiling is a mandate that lowers a price below equilibrium. A price ceiling when below equilibrium will cause a shortage or excess demand. So if we look right here, at equilibrium price, there's the same amount of people willing to sell something, or there's the same amount of stuff being sold as the people want to buy. But at this price, when we artificially lower it, what happens? Well, the suppliers are only willing to supply this much, and buyers are only willing to buy this much, or they're willing to buy much more than what's being supplied. So we have more demand than we have supply. Well, there's going to be a shortage of it. And you can see here that we lose a lot of consumer and producer surplus because we are no longer enjoying the whole triangle. We are only enjoying this portion of it. And this portion that we lost of consumer and producer surplus is called deadweight loss. And actually, this is drawn incorrectly. I apologize. What happens here is that you see how producer surplus producer surplus is down here, and producer surplus or consumer surplus is up there. So it's a net loss in total surplus, but it's can be an increase in consumer surplus, but it's a net loss in surplus. So it makes the market inefficient. The shortage makes the market inefficient, and the inefficiency can be measured in the graph as the gray area called deadweight loss. A price floor is a mandate Sorry, I didn't realize I messed up in these graphs. A price floor is a mandate that raises a price above equilibrium, and a price floor causes a surplus or excess supply. So this many people want to buy stuff, and there's this much being supplied. So we have more supply than demand. So we have more of this thing than people want. So they're only able to sell um, a little amount at that price because not as many people want to buy it. And that area, gray area, deadweight loss. We can calculate deadweight loss the same way we calculate consumer and producer surplus with the area of a triangle. Um, okay, next is subsidies and taxes. Um, so a subsidy causes a shift in supply down that dollar amount. A subsidy is the government giving money away to businesses. So let's say this is $10, then that would be a $10 subsidy. Um, and so with that subsidy, you can calculate deadweight loss by the triangle between the two supply curves, between this new price and old price, make a triangle. And the cost is this rectangle. So how much taxpayers have to pay in order to pay for that subsidy is in this yellow box. From the old, the new quantity, the new and old price subtracted from each other times quantity. Okay. A tax is business is paying the government. Tax shifts supply up by that dollar amount. Um, and so you have your new quantity, old quantity. Your deadweight loss is this triangle. And then the price is sorry, I'm blinking. Um, the the revenue from the taxes is the difference. Yeah, the cost of the tax. So this amount times quantity. Yeah, that is government intervention. Next is international trade. Um, international trade and public policy. Is that what it said? Oops. Okay, the questions about international trade begin with giving you a world price. So this world price can be above or below your equilibrium. And this actually doesn't cause deadweight loss. So in unit 1, we talked about gains from trade. So if two parties are willingly trading, then there's gains from trade. So at this price, local producers are only willing, or local consumers are only willing to consume that much. But local suppliers are willing to supply this much. Well, what they do is they export this extra quantity. So the orange is the producer surplus and the blue is the consumer surplus. And then here we have if the world price is lower than equilibrium, suppliers are only willing to supply this much and consumers are willing to buy this much. So we import that quantity. No deadweight loss. A quota of imports limits the supply that can be imported, and that effectively raises the world price to match that difference. So here we have a quota of 40. So prior to the quota, they were importing 70 because producers were only willing to supply 20 and consumers were willing to buy 90, and now um, yeah, so they'd import 70 to make up for it. But now with a quota of 40 saying that we can only import 40 of that thing, well, now all of a sudden we're going to have more local producers. So maybe we have 30 local producers, or yeah, 30 of that thing produced locally, and they demand 70 of it, so we import the 40. And then that's what our deadweight loss would look like. That area between the world price and the tariff. A tariff effectively raises a world price by by that much. So here we have a $5 tariff. So the world price used to be $10, and there was this many people supplying it and this many people um, demanding it. And by a $5 tariff, now we have this many people supplying it locally and this many people buying it. So we are losing out on beneficial interactions, causing deadweight loss, but we're also getting tariff revenue. So the tariff revenue is in yellow, and deadweight loss is gray. And the tariff is you take your where that new price intersects, and you sorry I'm blinking so much, and that area between that old price, and that's your rectangle. Quotas can also be done by drawing a line at the quantity. So like if there's a domestic quota saying, like let's say this was a nation that didn't trade, and it was a domestic quota saying that we can only produce so much of this thing, and maybe it's for like conserving something reasons, like you wanted to conserve a resource, or um, I don't know. But yeah, they'll put a quota, like drawing a line at that quantity, and that effectively sets um, your quantity, or here's the price that consumers are willing to pay and the price that producers are willing to pay, or yeah, willing to pay. There's this gap, and that increases. Huh. I forget how they determine what price. Oh, I think I remember. Usually there's some arbitrator of this value. So whenever I read about quotas in the Krugman book, it talked about the taxi medallions, how that's effectively a quota on taxis. And so the cost of the medallion was this difference. Yeah, okay, that's unit 2. Next is unit 3. Give me 1 second. So unit 3, we're gonna learn about production costs and the perfect competition model. So the production function is the relationship between inputs and outputs. There's two types of resources, or they're sometimes called costs: um, fixed resources or costs, and variable resources or costs. Fixed resources do not change as you produce more. An example would be like machines or land. So let's say I'm a bakery, right? If I produce 5 cakes this week, or if I produce 100 cakes this week, and I only own one oven, that cost of the oven is only counted once, no matter how much I produce. But variable resources change as you produce more. So maybe eggs. Yeah, eggs would be an example of this. Um, so as the more cakes that the baker produces, the more eggs that they need to buy. So it depends on how much they make. So that's variable costs. So in the short run, there's at least one fixed resource. So short run and long run, there's like no like time that defines short run or long run. It's just what defines it is whether your resources are variable or fixed. So in the long run, all your resources are variable, right? So um sorry, I'm blanking. That baker, right? In the next year, they wanted to grow their baking business. They may buy more ovens, and therefore it's a variable resource, right? They expect that they're going to grow, so then they buy more or they buy not fixed resources. They buy more ovens, and it's therefore a variable resource in the long run. In the short run, at least one variable is fixed. So um, that long run for the baker might be 2 weeks because it takes them 2 weeks to buy an oven and for it to get there, So they can't adjust um, their fixed resources in that short run. Yeah. So to determine long run, find how long it takes to get your most fixed resource. So workers are sometimes variable. No. Workers are variable. Never mind. Um, but like maybe that baker, right? It takes them 2 weeks to hire a worker and 4 weeks to get an oven. So their long run, what defines their long run is 4 weeks. Last thing about 3.1 is we're going to talk about law of diminishing marginal returns. So as you add more of a variable resource to your fixed resource, the more your additional per unit of variable resource will eventually decrease. So that basically means if you have one oven, yeah, you have one oven and you have one worker. Maybe that worker can make one cake an hour. Let's say you add another worker. Now this guy has a lot more help, and he can specialize in something in the kitchen, and they can make 3 cakes in an hour. So the increase between the workers is +2. And then let's say we add another worker. Um, Now they start getting in each other's way, but they're still able to make more cakes than they did before. So they make 4 cakes in an hour. But you see, it's only +1. And so each worker we add slowly starts getting more inefficient. Law of diminishing marginal returns. And the reason why I say per fixed resource is, let's say we had the same scenario where we had, actually, I'm going to continue my example for 4 workers because it makes my next example a bit better. We get a 4th worker. Maybe they're able to make 4.5 cakes in an hour. Plus half a cake. But let's say we had the same scenario. But with 2 ovens. Well, then we assign 2 workers per oven. And then 2 workers per oven gets us 3 cakes. 3 cakes an hour. So now we're in a scenario with 3 cakes. So law of diminishing marginal return is the more variable resources you apply to your fixed resource, the less efficient those variable resources will be, or the less additional utility you'll get out of those variable resources. Next is, oopsies, I spoiled some answers. Short run production costs. So they like asking FRQs on Unit 3. So, yeah. So as we talked about earlier, there's types of resources and costs. Fixed and variable. Variable do not change as you fixed do not change as you produce more. Example, machines and land. Variables change as you produce more workers and ingredients, right? Your total costs are going to equal your fixed costs plus your variable costs, right? Your marginal cost is going to be the cost to produce one additional unit. So the change in total cost divided by per change in output. So let's say we have the scenario where we have our variable cost right here and we have our fixed cost here. Well, fixed cost is always going to be 10. Well, what's our total cost? Well, if we produce 0, we have our fixed cost of 10. So our total cost is 10. If we increase our output by 1, so we have a variable cost of 10 and a fixed cost of 10, our total cost is 20. What's our marginal cost? Well, from 10 to 20, you increase 10. So if we increase another unit of output, 17 plus 10, 27. Our marginal cost, what does it cost to produce that one extra thing? $7. The 25, no, wait, another unit of output, variable cost is now 25. Our fixed cost is 10. Our total cost is 35. Our marginal cost is 8. Now we get to that fourth unit of output. Our variable cost has went up from 25 to 40. 40 plus 10, 50. Now our marginal cost is 15. And then we apply this for the last two, 70, 20, 120, 50. So you can see that I have a cleaner version of this. That our marginal cost, if you were to graph it, as here's our cost, and here's our quantity. If you were to have marginal cost, right? So it starts here. It decreases as we produce the first few units. And then as we produce more and more and more and more, our marginal cost increases. So that's how you would graph marginal cost. Then there's a few other things. So the reason why I mentioned how to graph marginal cost is because that's what you need to do for this unit. You need to be able to graph a few things and put them together and understand what they mean for competitive markets. So the next three things I'm going to introduce to you all is average variable cost, average fixed cost, and average total cost. So average variable cost is going to be your total variable cost subtracted by your quantity. So let's find an average variable cost. An average variable cost at 4 units is going to be, Well, our variable cost is 40. 40 divided by quantity 4 is 10. Right? Yeah. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong thing. Yeah, 10. Average fixed cost is going to be your fixed cost divided by your quantity. So at 5, our average fixed cost is going to be, well, fixed cost is $10 per unit divided by 5. Our average fixed cost is going to be 2. Simple, right? Just division. And our average total cost is going to be our total cost divided by our quantity. So our average total cost at 60 units is 120 divided by 6 is 20. Right? So then you have to put these together, right? So let's graph average fixed cost. Let's say this is unit 1, right? And this is $10, right? Or yeah, unit 1. Our fixed cost, our average fixed cost is 1 divided by 10 is 10. At unit 2, now it's 5. At unit 3, it's 2.5. Unit 4, it's 1.25. And then so on and so forth. So it approaches 0. Then we have our variable cost. So our average variable cost. Our average variable cost at 1 is 10. At 2, 17 divided by 2 is like, what, 8.5? At 3, variable cost 25 divided by 3. It's about, it's not quite 9. It's like 8 point something. So and at 4, it's 10. And then it's going to slowly start increasing. And you're going to have a line like this. And then your average total cost is what at 1? It is 20. And then at 2, it is like 13, right? Yeah. At 3, it's like 12. And at 4, it's like 12 again. Actually, it's not supposed to intersect with your average variable cost. But you get the idea. You need to be able to graph something like this. Oops. This one's very messy. This is what it should look like. When you add your average variable cost and your average fixed cost, you should be able to get your average total cost. 10 plus 10, 20. 2 plus 2 plus 12, 14. So you can see that you add it together. Your marginal cost is you graph, well, your marginal cost. And in order to go from your average to your regular, so if you wanted to figure out fixed cost and they give you average fixed cost, well, you just take it and multiply it by your quantity. So your fixed cost, 5 times 2, 10. Figure out like total cost, 5 times 14, 50, 70. So it's total cost is 70, and that checks out with our table. So yeah, be able to draw it. And something that's important to note is that variable cost, average variable cost and average total cost should hit their minimum when they intersect with marginal cost. So this should be your minimum or the lowest point in your average total cost. And this should be the lowest point in your average variable cost. Yeah, that's 3.2. I hope you all understood it. If not, Mr. Clifford has a good video on this. Explains a bit better than I do. Okay, economies of scale in long run costs. So, like we mentioned earlier, short run, at least one fixed resource. Long run, all resources are variable. If a firm doubles its input, there are three possible outcomes. Your output can more than double, which is more than double, which is increasing returns to scale or economies of scale. So the bigger something is, the more it returns, which is so in the long run, the bigger something is, the more it returns. And in the short run, it's the opposite, diminishing marginal returns. But in the long run, the more there is, the increasing returns to scale, aka economies of scale. If it doubles, if you double your inputs and you get double your outcomes, well, you have constant returns to scale. If you have less than double, you have decreasing returns to scale and diseconomies of scale. Economies of scale is just the idea that long run average costs fall as more output is produced. So if you think of, I'll go to the bakery example. If you think of like a really efficient factory that makes bread, their cost per loaf is probably a lot cheaper than your local bakery. So because they're bigger, in the long run, their average cost falls. Yeah. Next is types of profit. So there are explicit costs like the price of something. So like a movie ticket may be $20, right? So that would be an explicit cost. But there are also implicit costs, such as the opportunity cost of that action. So maybe your implicit cost of that movie ticket would be you could be working, right? Instead of watching the movie. So that 2 hours of what could have been work is your implicit cost, and whatever you make per hour would be how you'd calculate your implicit costs. So your total costs are your implicit plus your explicit costs. There's two types of profits. I think I mentioned it in Unit 1, but I'm mentioning it here again. There's accounting and economic profits. Accounting profits is just your revenue minus your explicit costs. Back to the bakery. Let's say you could sell a loaf for $5, but it costs you $2 of ingredients. Your accounting profit would be $3. But your economic profit wouldn't necessarily be $3. Your economic profit is your revenue minus your total costs. So that would include your opportunity costs. So maybe you could sell that loaf of bread for $5 and your ingredients cost $2, but maybe it was $3 worth of time. So then your economic profit would be 0. Or another way to calculate economic profit is you take your accounting profits and you just subtract your implicit costs. Yeah. Economic profit is a bit harder because opportunity cost is typically not as blatant or apparent. And in this class, I think in the test, they're going to make you do more this than this. So if they ask about total costs, or they'll probably ask you about economic profits And I would assume it's economic profits unless it's explicitly stated accounting profits. Okay, next is profit maximization. There is one rule when it comes to profit maximization. You want to stop where marginal revenue equals marginal costs. So, here we have the same graph I showed, or not the same, but a similar graph, right? Your check mark looking marginal cost, your kind of U-shaped average cost and average variable cost and average total cost, where their minimum is where they intersect with marginal cost. A firm will continue to produce until their marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So that baker will continue to produce until that loaf of bread will be making them $0, or no, until they'll be losing money per loaf of bread that they make. So they'll stop when marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So this is the profit maximization rule or loss minimizing rule, and I'll get into loss minimizing rule. So you can see here that at this price, the revenue is this box. Your costs, because your average total costs is going to be, remember this average total cost times quantity. So it's just going to be here. And you're going to make this rectangle, right? So this rectangle is your revenue. And this rectangle is your costs. So this would be your profit. This firm is making a profit. You can see it, right? So as long as you are above the average total cost, the firm is going to be making a profit. But what happens when when marginal revenue is that price? Well, that's their profit and their costs. They break even. Yeah. By the way, these are economic costs. Yeah. Not accounting. These are economic profits, not accounting profits. So we can see, is it? I don't know. Let me think about it. Give me 1 second. I apologize. Yeah, it's economic profits. Yeah, sorry. But yes, they aren't making an economic profit, but they'll continue to produce, right? Perfectly competitive markets don't make economic profits. Well, what happens when we have a marginal revenue right there? Well, here are our costs, or not there. Here are our costs. And here is our revenue. Well, we're making a loss. But see how we're not below our average variable costs? So as long as we're not below our average variable costs, we are making more than what our fixed costs are costing us. So a firm will stay in production if they are above average variable cost. And they make a profit when they're above average total cost. And so whenever they get below average total cost, well, they stop producing. They quit, they get out, because it's now costing more to stay open than it is to not stay open. Okay, next is perfect competition. There are four market structures: perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopolies, and monopolies. The latter we'll talk about in Unit 4, I believe. So in Unit 3, we only talk about perfect competition. So there are some characteristics of perfect competition. We have many small firms. There are low barriers to entry. They all have identical products. There's nothing differentiating the product. And the firms accept the price no matter what. They can't change the price. Think of like milk, right? Or I'll do gasoline, right? Yeah, I'll do gasoline. There are many gas stations, right? So there's many small firms. So check mark to that. Low barriers to entry. I mean, it's relatively low barriers to entry. You don't need um, like billions of dollars of capital. The identical products, yeah. So whatever you put in your car is gasoline. It's gonna make your car go. Doesn't matter if you get it from a Shell or a Valero. The product is identical. And the firm's exact price is another way to say that the price is standardized. So no matter where you go, the gas station is gonna be about the same price. They aren't gonna charge different prices at different gas stations. Maybe like 1 cent or 2 cent, a few cent differences, but it's about the same price everywhere. So firms accept price. So because firms sell identical products that makes their demand perfectly elastic. So that individual firm's demand will be perfectly elastic. It doesn't necessarily mean that the market's perfectly elastic, but that individual firm. Because what happens if that firm sells price or raises their price, right? What would you do, right? If you're driving your car and you need to put gas, right? And you pass by two gas stations. One is super high price, and the next one is the same price that everyone charges. Well, you're going to go to the one that charges the same price because why would you, or the lower price, because why would you pay more for a product that's literally identical? So that makes the firm's demand perfectly elastic. So you need to remember this, Mr. DARP. So it's marginal revenue equals demand equals average revenue equals price. So here we have an example. Oops. Uh, Here, marginal revenue equals demand, or marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That's where they're going to stop, or that's where they're going to produce at. Quantity times marginal revenue is going to give our total revenue. It's above our average total cost, so that's going to be our total cost, and it's going to have a profit. Like I mentioned or talked about earlier. But in the long run, no firm makes an economic profit in a perfectly competitive market. Why? Well, here we have a market, right? Let's say this is gas. And here we have the original marginal revenue, like we had up here. And people realize, oh, I can make a profit if I open a gas station. Then more people open up gas stations and the number of suppliers increase. So that increases supply. And what happens to your demand? Or nothing happens to your demand. What happens to your price? Well, it goes down and your quantity goes up. Or the market's quantity goes up. But that shifts your marginal revenue equals demand equals average revenue equals price down because your price went down. So you go from here down to here, and now you're not making a profit. So the perfectly competitive firm was originally making a profit, so more suppliers entered the market to capture that profit, increasing supply and bringing quantity demanded down, and the firm is no longer making a profit. Well, the same happens when they're at a loss, right? So I assume that maybe this firm's average variable cost is like down here. They have not reached uh, below their average variable cost. But you see right here, they are below their average total cost, so they're making a loss. And a lot of firms in this perfectly competitive market are making a loss. So more firms leave, and so then that raises the price because that supply shifts, and now this firm is no longer making a loss. It's now at that break-even point. So what would happen if a change in demand happened, right? So you would have to draw it. Um, so here we have supply one, and here we have demand one, or here we have supply, and here we have demand, and then demand increases, and so this marginal revenue goes up, and then now firms are making a profit. Yippee, right? So more demand increases this price. I should probably draw it. Oops. Draw it so I don't confuse you, but confuse you all. But let's say we had something like this. Supply, demand. What happens if demand increases? Well, then this goes up. And then now the firms are making a profit. Well, what happens when the firms are making a profit? Then more suppliers enter the market. So then we have our supply increase. And now the firm is no longer making a profit. So then it moves back down. So that's what happens when demand, or yeah, that's how we look at the firms in the long run. Or yeah, is it the long run? Yeah, long run equilibrium. This is how we look at perfectly competitive markets. This all assumes, like what I showed you here right now, all assumes that this is a constant cost industry. So what a constant cost industry is when firms enter the market, it does not increase the cost of materials. So as the more firms enter the market in a non-constant cost industry, then their materials become more expensive because of, well, that's a whole nother market, right? But their costs increase. So what happens? Well, this kind of shift happens, right? So we see here, um, we see here that demand increases, right? So what happens here? Demand increases. They're making a profit. What happens when they're making a profit? Well, supply increases. But as the more suppliers enter the market, the cost curves, your marginal cost and your average total cost, they're going to shift up. So then now it's going to look like, oops. Now it's going to look like that. And then now we have a new equilibrium here. So yeah, that's that's that. I hope this made sense. If you, I would recommend um, you try and do some of those FRQs that pertain to um, profit maximization. If you don't understand it, then um, I recommend you watch Mr. Clifford's videos. They're pretty good. Um, yeah, that's all I had for today. Uh, Thank you all for coming. We're halfway through it. We only have 3 more units, and we're done with micro. The test is fast approaching. There is less than like a month left. So yeah, good luck with the studying, guys. I'll see y'all later.